All right, folks, welcome to our episode extras. Thank you so much for joining us. It is my distinct privilege to be joined here by Ryan Smith. Ryan is the Chief External Officer for the Partnership for Los Angeles Schools. He is also someone who has had a really fascinating past working with Education Trust and Education Trust West on issues of policy and equity in California and nationally. So a mind with lots of good ideas for us to unpack here. So let's dig in. Ryan, I've heard you use this phrase, angelic troublemakers, quite a bit recently, and I'm wondering, what is an angelic troublemaker, and can I be one too?
So I wish I could take credit for coining the phrase, but it's actually from Bayard Rustin, who was a 1960s activist.
No diss, but even better, even better.
And if you know anything about Bayard Rustin, I feel like he's one of America's unsung heroes. He actually was the architect on the March on Washington. He was the person who found Martin Luther King and said, you should join the movement. He was an out queer man in the 1960s. And he said, every community needs a group of angelic troublemakers. And I believe in that. I believe we have to have people who are disrupting systems. The second half of that phrase, he says, the only weapons we have are our bodies, and we need to stick them in places where wheels don't turn. So when I think about my own career trajectory, it's been about how do we disrupt systems and how do we dismantle the systems that particularly have not done right by Black, brown, and low-income students. And so I do use that phrase a lot. I try to be an angelic troublemaker in my walk here on the planet.
Okay, and so I can be one too? Is that?
Yes, I think we all could be one. That's the whole goal.
Nice.
That's the call to action. Yeah.
Ryan said I could, folks. So Ryan, you now work for the partnership, but you also used to work for the partnership. You were in the sort of earlier years of the organization and were the founding director of the Family and Community Engagement team. And so for our audience, I'm wondering if you can just share a bit about, what does that mean? Like, what is that aspect of the organization's work, and why is it so important to our mission to transform schools and revolutionize school systems?
Yeah, so I started my career as a community organizer, organizing students, and later on as a community organizing parents. I believe in the power of parents. I believe it's the most untapped potential we have within our systems. And all the research shows that parents can support their students' academic success even in under-resourced communities. So I was recruited to the partnership 10 years ago when they said, okay, you've been railing against the system to do right by parents. Figure out how you can come in the system and build systems that are responsive to the needs of parents in Boyle Heights and Watts and South LA. So that was the goal. We didn't have as many resources back then, but we had an amazing cadre of volunteers and parents, and we did a couple things. One, we refurbished every parent center at every partnership school, because if you don't have a place to go, there's no way you can actually feel welcomed. We trained our office staff on making sure that when parents come to the school sites, they feel as if they belong there. And then we created a coordinating committee called Family Action Teams. FAT for short, like I say, aguacate is the good fat for the body, avocado, not the bad fat. But really to get a coordinating committee to create a strategic plan around family engagement. But we made sure that family engagement wasn't just nice Halloween parades. It was about helping parents understand how they support their children's academic success. And then we built a parent college. So I was inspired by some of the baby college work of the Harlem Children's Zone, where they went deep in communities and said, what can we do to support the early learning, students' early learning? And they ensured that parents knew what they need to do at home. Well, I said, why can't we do that K through 12? Why can't we do that in Los Angeles? So we built a program dedicated to helping parents understand their 3 R's, their rights, roles, and responsibilities, and had LAUSD teachers come in and teach courses on the basics. I once had a parent say, look at me very excited, she was a speaker, and she said, I'm so excited, my students in F's. And I said, F. She said, F for fantastico. I said, no, actually, F's are not for fantastico. I don't know if someone is not, but we often think that our parents know everything about this system. Yeah. But many of our parents either are new to this country or they were disrespected by their educational journeys, and they don't know the ins and outs of the system the way that we think. And then we go, they don't come to anything. Well, they don't come to anything because we haven't made it, we haven't built systems that actually support them where they're at. So the Parent College is designed to learn all the things that your children, and 5,000 parents have gone through it. So I'm coming back to that work and really excited to see where it's grown and it's evolved, and looking forward to take it to its next iteration as well.
Yeah, I can imagine that the youngster whose mom thought the F was for Fantastico might have helped her come to that conclusion too. Like, look at this great set of Fantasticos I got.
Let me tell you, she never said that again.
Okay.
She's a model parent.
Yeah. Okay. So before rejoining the partnership, we're in a really interesting space, I think, in California and nationally, being at the forefront of a lot of conversations about policy, and specifically policy as it relates to equity issues in our system. And so I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about kind of what is happening maybe at the state level here in California, that most people only know their school and their district, and maybe aren't so much aware of what's happening at the state level, even though so much of our policy and what gets put into place emanates from state departments of education. So what's happening in California? What can you tell us? What's going on?
A lot. Well, I'll say this. California's at an interesting inflection point. We have a new governor-elect, Gavin Newsom. We have a new state superintendent-elect in Tony Thurmond. In the last 5 years, we've seen California redesign its accountability system in ways that we think about measuring student success. We've created a new dashboard that's kind of controversial, actually, in that it is multicolored, it has different indices, and some people love it, some people don't. And we're thinking differently about how we support practice. So there's a vibrant conversation at the state around continuous improvement. This idea is, how do we, similar to some of the work that my organization, the partnership, does, how do we build the capacity of district leaders to really understand what they need to do to transform school systems? So there's this interesting dovetailing of practice, policy, and conversations around equity that are happening. One thing I will say is that California often talks and touts itself as a beacon of racial justice. And in many ways it is, when you think about the work we've done around immigrant rights. But when it comes to education, we have some of the most challenging opportunity and achievement gaps across the state. And I don't think we're all on the same page. I think oftentimes progressive states like to say that they care about students, but when you look at the outcomes, they're really challenging. And I have one anecdote, so California recently, in the last now 6 years, passed the local control funding formula, which gives more money to districts that have higher concentrations of low-income students, English learners, and foster youth, and homeless youth. And Governor Brown passed that, and someone who I really believe in, when he passed that policy, do you believe this is meant to close achievement gaps? And he said to the reporter on the record, well, why are you asking that question? What do you mean about that? Because if we close, who would wash our windows? Who would wait our table? We get robots to do that. It doesn't take a rocket science to hear that there is this notion that there will always be an underclass of people who will do that type of work. But we're not talking about children. Yeah. We're not talking about rich children. We're talking about low-income children and children. So we all need to get on the same page. We may be a progressive beacon, but in education, we have work to do.
Yeah, I hadn't heard that from Jerry Brown.
How Matters, you can look it up.
They must have done a good job hiding that one, sweeping it under the rug right there. So one of the publications that you were very involved in, I think, speaks to the exact issue. So Ed Trust West put out this publication called Black Minds Matter. And a fascinating piece, which is still up online, and folks can Google it and download. But really exploring the not only the value and potential that our African American students have, but also the ways in which the system is not fulfilling its obligations, intentionally undermining, and all the stuff in between that results in these gaps that we were just talking about, and this, this permanent underclass in many cases. So tell us a bit about Black Minds Matter and what you see as the policy implications that our audience might be interested in.
Yeah, so that was the first project that I undertook as executive director of EdTrust West, which is a policy research and advocacy organization dedicated to closing opportunity achievement gaps here in the state. And it's interesting, there's a vibrant conversation, obviously, about how policing, particularly police brutality, was leading to honestly, the destruction of many Black lives, right? So if we're talking about that as a system, just the policing system, a criminal justice system, and how it tells through its policies and practice that Black lives matter less than others, we can make the comparison around how policies and practices within school sites tell Black children every day that their minds matter less too. And that's from a lot of data that we see, where we see African American students in the state are less likely to be identified for gifted and talented, more likely to be suspended and expelled, less likely to have access to A through G courses than many other groups, and the list goes on and on. And as Dr. Pedro Noguera would say about Black boys, Black young men in the state across this country are over identified to almost every indicator connected to failure and under connected to every indicator connected to success. So it is an issue that we need to talk about. So we produced that report in 2015. We saw 1,000 Black and brown students march to the Capitol demanding accountability and equity for their success. We saw the State Board of Education start an entire grant based on the data for Black Minds Matter to grant to county offices and districts to turn the curve on some of this work, and the Black Caucus and Latino Caucus endorsed the report as well. And the new state superintendent, Tony Thurman, will reference that report often. So it became a rallying cry to say that this data should really shame us. We should do something different. And to this day, people will come with me with their tattered copies in communities of Black Minds Matter saying, this is my advocacy tool, and that makes me as proud as possible.
Yeah, well, it should. So I think we have time for one last question. So I want to ask you, if you were king of the education world, Ryan, for a day, if you could change one thing, what would you change and why?
Yeah, so I've grown up in this educational reform and justice space. And as I mentioned, I started as an organizer when I was 15 around educational issues. And one thing that I've seen throughout my career is that people are well-intentioned, they care, but they tend to think, I know what's best for communities of color. I know what's best for students of color. I know what's best for the educators who teach in these communities. And I think that's been to the detriment of a lot of educational change efforts. So if I were king for the day, I would erase this notion that we can, in our siloed spaces, on our ivory towers, say that this is what's best for these communities. I think that is racist. I think it's classist. I think it has issues connected to gender. If we're going to start from scratch, we need to say, what is it that's going to be responsive to the community needs? How do we meet the community where they're at? How do we help educators who are in the classroom actually perfect their craft? How do we ensure that we're recruiting educators of color who care about the communities that they're in? How are we saying, yes, the system is racist and classist, and even us well-intentioned people who work within these systems begin to actually own our implicit biases that say that maybe our children can't do math. And that doesn't mean, we know that there are educators who happen to look like me who may believe that, but you can't see a movie like, you can't see the brilliance of some of our students and say that we are not doing everything or I should say, we can't see the brilliance of our students and not say that we should be doing everything to support their success. And I feel like we're not having the real conversation around why these policies and practices continue to exist. So let's have that courageous conversation.
Yeah. Hear, hear. Well, Ryan Smith, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate your time. And folks, to learn more about Ryan, to learn more about the Black Minds Matter report, you can find that on our website. That's aotashow.com. Again, that's aotashow.com. We'll see you next time.